Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm taking a look at Daredevil, and up front, I'm not really sure what to say about him. The character does have some use in Alliance Conquest, and that is entirely on the reliance of one skill. If he didn't have this one skill, which you could probably guess is the iframe ignore counter, the character would essentially be useless. The character is essentially useless in every other game mode because his upgrades just aren't good enough for him to excel anywhere else besides Alliance Conquest, and even there I wouldn't really say he does excel, he just has a use. My criticism of Daredevil might sound a little bit harsh, but I'm getting a bit tired of reviewing characters that are supposed to be the main kind of focus of an update, since this one is for the Born Again tie-in in the MCU. You would think that Daredevil would have the biggest kind of upgrade so that people would want to jump back into the game and play the character that is basically iconic in the show and that might be their favorite or is a popular one. But the upgrades they're getting are really kind of lackluster or just kind of subpar and not really fulfilling the upgrade that they should get to make them substantially better from the uniform that they previously had. What I mean by this is that the uniform and tier 4 upgrade should be good enough that it should be a clear winner. I should easily be able to recommend it even through minimal testing, and people will want to jump and pick up the uniform and his upgrades as soon as basically the patch notes dropped. But that's not really the case, and for a character whose kit is being pushed for PvP and has only a single life, in a meta where PvP is being dominated by characters who either have immortality or revive, his kit should basically be stacked to be able to compete and have any value there, but that is hardly the case. Keep in mind that all of the PvE testing that I did is without a damage proc. If you do want to build him for PvE, which I do not recommend, then a CTP of Rage is likely the way to go. He has a lot of skills that you are going to rotate through one after another without necessarily canceling because they don't layer on top of one another. And for that reason as well, a CTP of Energy or Destruction won't really work that great for him, I would say. So a CTP of Rage is really just your only option there. The first test I did with Daredevil was on stage 24 of Null, no leadership or supports, and using the old uniform. And with that, I was able to complete the stage with roughly around 1 minute and 30 seconds remaining. The new uniform does provide an improvement in PvE regardless if you're going to use him there. I was able to complete the same stage around 40 seconds faster with about 2 minutes and 10 seconds remaining. The level 80 upgrade obviously improved him further, and I was able to shave off another minute and 25 seconds from the clear time, finishing with roughly around 3 minutes and 35 seconds remaining. In terms of the rotation, the one that I went with is to use the third skill. If you go into the skill preview, it'll tell you to cancel it, but I found that it does a lot of damage, so I would probably recommend trying not to cancel it and get that extra amount of hits and damage from that. Then from there, use the fourth skill. After that's finished, you move on to the fifth skill. It's pretty straightforward. There's no real canceling. You can potentially cancel the third skill to go into 4 and 5, but I found that it kind of worked better just to let the third skill play through. And obviously, you can cancel the first and second skill to fill up the tier 3 and tier 4 faster. When you have your ultimate, the rotation does become a little bit different. This time, you might want to consider canceling the third skill up front so you get the damage accumulation, and then go into the sixth skill. You delay cancel that after you kind of see the animation of a little red aura thing appear. You know at that point that you can cancel the skill, and then you just go into your 4 and 5. By that point, the third skill should be off cooldown again, so you can go back into the rotation that I mentioned previously. If you have the character at tier 4, you want to spam the tier 4 skill whenever you have it, so you can get that extra striker damage and have that chain hit damage up as well on top of his other skills. I don't end up clearing stage 35 of Dark Phoenix. I run at a time with 17 health bars left, even though I have a leadership and support this time, but it's kind of to give you an idea of the improvement when I get him to tier 4. I wasn't really expecting to clear this with the way his kit currently works at level 80. Daredevil's tier 4 skill does seem pretty decent. He basically gets the one that Black Widow and Quicksilver have, but they've traded out the attack increase for chain hit damage, which definitely really helps him out in PvE, considering that any kind of damage augment is much more substantial than basic attack increases. What's more important for PvP though is the stat bump increases. He gains a pretty good chunk of HP increase with the tier 4 upgrade. It's about 32,000, which is solid for a speed type. And he also gains a pretty hefty increase in physical attack, roughly around 17,000, which I think is above the curve for any kind of physical attack increases or attack increases in general. In terms of the strikers to use for PvE, you definitely want to go for ones that have the same kind of instinct type, because you want to max out his tier 4 skill and gain the max amount of chain hit damage that you can get from that, as well as the damage that you get after dodging. So good ones for that are Black Widow and Ghost Rider. Similarly for PvP, those are actually pretty solid options too. If you max out his tier 4 skill, he's effectively getting 110% cumulative damage increase, around 80% from the dodging aspect and 30% chain hit damage. And again, as you may know, damage increases are really substantial in terms of augmenting the character's performance. It's much more substantial than a flat attack increase and does make a pretty significant difference. You can see that in the same test with that tier 4 skill maxed out and the striker, of course, I'm able to basically do an additional 17 health bars of damage and able to actually clear the stage with over a minute remaining. I actually hit that same 17 health bar mark roughly 3 minutes faster with the tier 4 upgrade. No surprise, Daredevil isn't good in Alliance Battle Extreme. First of all, he doesn't have all the cancel effects for the different seasons, but he also has a low hit count. So if you don't have the cancel effect or to basically roar cancel, you're basically just stuck hitting that shield, and he doesn't have enough hits to basically get through that. I was only able to hit somewhere around 5 million with him. I wasn't even able to crack 6 million. I'm sure that even if I had the cancel effect, he would have struggled to hit 8 million, even with Nick Fury and White Fox support. How do I know that? Because when I took him to tier 4 and he got all those upgrades, and I also got the roar cancel effect, the burning from the striker using Ghost Rider, I was basically able to hit close to 9.5 million and wasn't able to hit even 10 million, again because of his low hit count, and that chain hit damage doesn't really help him that much in Alliance Battle Extreme. He's not going to be used here or in Alliance Battle Legend. On the somewhat bright side, his performance in PvP is substantially better than his PvE performance, though probably not much better than his previous PvP performance with his old uniform. You can see that at level 80 with a CTP of regen, I was able to take out at least one life of the top metas, including Sentry and Null. But he does have survivability issues and his performance is inconsistent, so you're not necessarily going to be doing this very often. You can see in this clip that the tier 4 upgrade didn't really help him much in terms of his survivability. He was only able to take out one life of Sentry after dying, but this also ties back to his inconsistency because he is reliant on dodge to avoid damage, but also heal. So that little bit of extra HP with the tier 4 upgrade does help him, but is not noticeable all the time. For this reason, in this last test, I ended up using Jessica Jones because I found that you essentially have to run Daredevil with some kind of support to augment his survivability, because he can only heal off of dodging, and that has a pretty long cooldown. So you basically need to add to his survivability so that he can heal more often and activate his iframe ignore counter, which is basically the bread and butter of his kit and the only real way that he is going to take out an opponent. So you want him to live as long as possible because that counter skill will essentially always one-shot the opponent. Get equivalent testing between the Mighty Conquest and the Mighty Authority. I tried him out with and without Jessica Jones, and the result without Jessica Jones was essentially the same as the Mighty Authority. He's not really that viable without having that extra damage augment layer. But between those two CTPs, although I would recommend pretty much either Authority or Conquest, those are his only real two viable options, since he needs that super guard break immunity for the counter skill to activate and have that protection for the counter skill, but also because he needs survivability more than anything else, and no other CTP can provide that to him to the same extent. You can potentially use a regen, but he doesn't have that super guard break immunity from it, and like I said, you'd need it for the third skill to confirm the counter effect. So between those two CTPs, I would probably recommend a Mighty Conquest first before a Mighty Authority, especially if you run him with Jessica Jones or another character that provides him some added layer of damage reduction, because the healing that the Conquest improves on top of the damage reduction that you get from the support will ultimately end up being more. And if you're running a Steel Authority, you're basically going to be overcapped the first time that you go under 50% health and Jessica Jones's support passive activates. But the trade-off is that you also have more consistent invincible when the Authority activates that, which you only get when he goes into his fourth skill. Although he did get some good improvements, his counter skill now has a 3-second lower cooldown, so he can activate it more often. He also has debuff removal on it, so he won't get CC'd as much, and has super armor, so he can potentially go up versus some opponents that have super guard break penetration right off the bat. But the main issue that he has is that they didn't really change his sustainability. So even though he has all of these things to be a little bit more tanky and offensive, he only heals once every 9 seconds, which doesn't make sense considering that so many characters now have multiple ways of healing, not only through their passives, but also active skills, and Daredevil still doesn't have that. So he effectively just he's a one and done character. He uses counter skill, and if he doesn't die, he can potentially hit again, but more often than not, he'll just end up dying. And you can see that in this particular clip with Deadpool, where even though I have a support with Daredevil, a Deadpool that doesn't have anything is essentially almost able to take him out. At one point in time, Daredevil was actually used in Timeline and was meta there because he was really strong with his counter skill instantly being able to kill the opponent and the fourth skill locking you down. But with so many characters now having super guard break penetration and super guard break immunity, and him not having the sustain to stay alive, he's basically not really going to be used in Timeline because you also need supports to make him work, and sometimes you might not want to do that. But if you do want to use him in Timeline for some insane reason, then the way to use him is basically just to spam his skills. I would actually recommend opening with the fourth skill sometimes so that you get the invincible. It seems like the invincible effect with super armor kind of protects you a little bit more versus the super guard break penetration. So if the opponent will immediately hit you with that super guard break penetration and you use your third skill, they might just lock you down. But if you have the invincible, often times it seems like you get an added layer of protection and can actually go through with the counter skill, which again is one of the issues with the character. He really should have some kind of super guard break immunity because he's so reliant on the third skill. Without it, he's kind of useless. So you're basically using the fourth skill canceled into the third skill to one-shot your opponent, and then just using whatever other skills you have available and any potential iframes from those to hide and fill up your ultimate and tier 4 faster. You don't really have a way of controlling his health because it is dependent on dodge. So if you do end up getting low, there's nothing really you can do about it, unlike other PvP characters, which are reliant and you can choose to heal whenever you use certain skills. Again, his only real value in PvP will be in Alliance Conquest, and that will more than likely be with the defenders on the same team, so it's kind of hard to tell whether he's doing everything because Luke Cage does end up actually doing a lot with Reflect and everything else. I did try to take him up against characters that weren't physical damage so that you could kind of see what he does more often than not. But again, Luke Cage and Jessica Jones do also have iframe ignore, so they do end up helping him out. It does seem like the added debuff cleanse and super armor to the third skill allow him to get the counter skill off more reliably, especially if you pair him with Jessica Jones, so he has that survivability to stick around and potentially pull it off the second time. But like I mentioned before, his survivability and performance is just so questionable. And you can see that in this clip where he's able to take out characters like Thanos, but then struggles versus tier 3 characters like Magic and Apocalypse. So he struggles in that fight versus tier 3 characters, and then in the very next test I do versus a tier 4 Magic and Doom, he's able to basically clear that one. I only really did one test versus Adam Warlock, and I found that he didn't really work that well there because Adam Warlock seems to have higher priority than him, so he might not activate his counter skill, but also because the burst damage that Adam has can potentially go through the Jessica Jones passive effect that applies to him and Luke Cage. But what's wild to me and reiterates my point is that Luke Cage, a uniform that is all the way back when Defenders were first upgraded and Daredevil got his first uniform, was still able to out-survive Daredevil's latest uniform, and that was even the case in the Apocalypse clip where Jessica Jones ended up outliving and outlasting Daredevil too. That basically encapsulates what's wrong with this uniform and upgrade, where characters from years ago are able to outsurvive Daredevil, who is not only level 80, but also tier 4 with his latest uniform upgrade that barely changes his survivability, despite all the things that they've added, because they didn't improve his sustainability, i.e. his healing. They gave him 30% damage reduction, which I didn't mention previously, but that hardly matters when he can't stay alive to fight. His artifact is also useless, and the design for the character doesn't really make sense because he really should have gone the dodge artifact that they gave to White Tiger, considering that he basically needs to dodge to survive and get the healing. But at the same time, with all those added dodge layers, he has a counter iframe skill where he needs to get hit to be able to activate the high damage version of the counter skill. So it's kind of anti-synergistic there. You either provide him with not a counter, just the straight up iframe ignore, which he basically should have if they're pushing for dodge being the main survivability layer. But at the same time, they either need to increase the number of ways that he can get healing, not only through dodge, or reduce the kind of cooldown that dodge passive thing activates at. Because if you know, Thanos actually has that healing passive that activates every 2 seconds, and it's when he gets hit, not even when he dodges. Daredevil needs to dodge on top of having that high cooldown for the healing. And I'm not saying that he should easily be able to counter top metas or have the same meta effects applied to him, but at the same time, he has a single life, and if you're pushing for him to be good in PvP, he needs to have a little bit of a stacked kit to actually excel there and not be entirely reliant on the defenders who are basically outperforming him in Alliance Conquest. That pretty much sums up Daredevil. If you want him for Alliance Conquest, that's really going to be his only use. For everyone else, he's essentially useless. The devs really could have done a little bit more to make him better in PvE as well, so that people could utilize him there if they wanted to. Having skills that don't even stack on top of one another or can't be cancelled or delay cancelled doesn't make sense in the current game when so many characters can do that. The next video I'll be working on is Punisher. That'll probably drop tomorrow on the Sunday or a little shortly after, maybe on the Monday. But if you enjoyed this video, found it entertaining or useful, please consider liking, subscribing, and potentially sharing it with others. It can help them out, and it definitely helps my channel grow so I can make more content like this for you guys. As always, I appreciate people taking the time to watch my videos, so thank you, but the video is now over.